Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Political Vigilante. Very special episode here. For those of you who are new to the show, please like, subscribe, share these videos, and also you can support the show on Patreon at patreon.com/Graham Elwood. And do me a favor, a free way to support the show is let the ads play on YouTube, even if they're crazy. Like I know there's some like why socialism is bad ad that's playing right now. Don't click skip ad, because when you do that, I don't get paid. And of course, all my tour dates for the Progressive Comedy Tour and all that are at grahamelwood.com. I'm doing Political Vigilante live in Los Angeles, January 30th. My special guest is Jimmy Dore. So I have a very special guest today. Peter Frederick. Peter, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. I'm doing real well. Glad to be talking to you, Graham.
Thanks, man. I know we're a good 9 hours apart, so thank you for scheduling the time to do this. So, to everybody out there watching, you know, the conversation we're gonna have is about going into the specifics and the details of Tulsi Gabbard's ties to Hindu nationalism, and I want to break this down for our audience because there's a lot of ridiculous smears that are made by her, like she's an Assad apologist and all of that crazy stuff. And that really, a lot of that comes from the Democratic Party. When she broke ties, she left the DNC in 2016 to support Bernie Sanders because she felt like Debbie Wasserman Schultz cheated him. Then the corporate Democrats have really tried to go after her because she's a threat to their power. And those smears, in my opinion, those are their smears, and they're ridiculous and they're not legitimate. Peter, what you're here to do is really, you've done extensive research on Tulsi Gabbard's ties to the Hindu nationalists and all that. Before we go into the specifics, why don't you tell everybody what your sort of history and background is in terms of studying India and Hinduism, just so we can get an idea of where you're coming from.
Sure, Graham. I am an analyst of South Asian affairs. I am a published author. I write and I speak about India specifically. Been doing it for about 12 years. I speak frequently alongside minorities from India, including Sikhs, Christians, Muslims, Buddhists, Dalits, who are the people formerly known as untouchables in India. And I just actually got back from 3 months in India last year. So I write especially about human rights situation in India, and not exclusively, but also a lot about Hindu nationalism and Hindutva, which are basically the same thing, which is the political ideology of the current ruling government in India.
Okay, so let's get into that. So I'm just now myself learning about Hindutva, and tell us exactly what that is, because that is the movement or ideology that Tulsi Gabbard appears to have some ties to.
Exactly. And I would say she doesn't have ties to. It's much more extensive than ties. But to introduce Hindutva, Hindutva is also known as Hindu nationalism. It's basically religious nationalism. The United States Commission on International Religious Freedom a few years ago, they defined it as an ideology which holds non-Hindus as foreign to India. Amnesty International has also defined it as the political ideology of an exclusively Hindu nation. So basically, it's a religious nationalism which seeks to purify India and which propagates the idea that India is a country of Hindus, for Hindus, and only for Hindus.
Okay. So equate what Hindutva could, I mean, what are they, is there any sort of American counterparts, or what would you equate them to any organizations here in America?
They definitely have American counterparts. They also have, the American counterparts are counterparts to Indian organizations. Specifically in India, they have 3 major organizations. One was founded in the 1920s. It's called the RSS. It's a social organization, but it's basically a paramilitary. The CIA last year defined it as a nationalist organization. They're uniformed. They're all male. They conduct daily and or weekly drills with weapons, usually staffs. They have been repeatedly implicated in committing pogroms against minorities. There is another subsidiary organization of that, founded in the 1960s, called the.
Specifically, what do you mean?
I mean that in the past 20 years, past 30 years, there have been two major pogroms, primarily against Muslims, staged by this RSS. This RSS, it's a paramilitary, basically a fascist organization, which controls the current government in India today, which is ruled by a political party called the BJP, which is basically just a subsidiary of the RSS. Okay. The RSS is the neck that turns the head of the BJP. And the prime minister, the president, the vice president, about half of the members of the central government's cabinet are all RSS members, or have been.
Okay.
And when I say pogroms, specifically, most recently, most significantly in 2002, the current prime minister, when he was executive of a state in India, his administration was implicated in staging a pogrom against Muslims, which resulted in the death of about 2,000 Muslims over about 3 days.
And this is Modi, who is the current prime minister?
This is Narendra Modi, who's the current prime minister.
Okay, and so when he was into the RSS in 2002, he basically went after the Muslim community that resulted in 2,000 deaths?
Basically, he wasn't head of the RSS. He's a lifelong RSS member. At the time, he was a official, a politician in office, the executive head of one of the states, Gujarat, in India. And yes, his administration, including legislators in his administration, including leading politicians from his party in his state, including members of the RSS and the VHP and these other Hindutva organizations, staged this pogrom and massacred Muslims.
Because he was then banned from entering the United States, correct?
Subsequently, 3 years later, he tried to come to the U.S. He was banned based off of being implicated in staging that pogrom. And that ban was in place from 2005 until 2014. The only reason it was removed was because he was elected prime minister. And so he has diplomatic immunity, basically.
Okay, so now let's get into your evidence of Tulsi Gabbard's ties to this. And I want to preface this by saying when I first heard before you and I spoke, I thought, and I think a lot of progressives felt like, well, Modi was at her wedding and it was just sort of like another smear tactic, like...
Let me jump in there and clarify. It wasn't Modi who was at her wedding. It was a representative of Modi.
It was a representative Modi. Okay, a representative Modi was at her wedding. And so a lot of people could go, you know, hey, whatever. Some people have big weddings and in the sense also too, like her very anti-gay stance that she had growing up. She had a very conservative father. There's that ad that he did for, marriage equality in Hawaii, where he's like, I wouldn't marry my daughter. And you see a young Tulsi Gabbard.
Yeah.
So, and her voting record has, to me, in my opinion, it's like my first thing is like, well, we're all victims of how we were raised and the families we were born in. We're all victims of being Americans and being bred to be capitalists. And I was raised Catholic, and I don't support the Catholic Church at all, and I've been very vocal about them covering up the pedophile priests, and I wouldn't align myself with Catholicism at all. So you could just say, well, and her voting record she has 100% positive record, or A+, whatever, from Human Rights Watch. So she's been very pro-gay in her voting and in her legislation. So what would you say to someone that's like, yeah, but this Modi thing, they're just trying, it's like when Obama went to that church with that black preacher who was all like hating white people and racist, and they tried to put that around Obama, and that wasn't the case. So why don't you then, to that complaint or that criticism, why don't you go into the details here that say that it was more than just...
It's more than just that. It's much more than just that. So when this guy was a representative at her wedding, that was in April 2015, you have to really trace back and look at the 4 years previous to that as far as the ongoing long-term relationship between her and the organizations, the nationalist organizations that this particular individual named Ram Madhav represents.
Okay.
And when he was there as a representative of Narendra Modi, the Prime Minister of India. But there were 4 years of back history that led up to him being there. And that really begins in her first primary election when she was just running for Congress. She announced her Congress in May 2011. By the end of 2011, the beginning of 2012, she was developing strong ties before she'd won the primary to Hindutva, Hindu nationalist organizations based in the U.S., which are the U.S. chapters of organizations back in India. And this was before Modi came to power. This was before the BJP, his political party, came to power. It was while they were mobilizing, trying to get him into power in 2014. And these organizations found Gabbard, and they latched on to her, and they identified Gabbard as somebody that could be used as a figurehead to help advance their agenda of whitewashing Narendra Modi and his record, and whitewashing the BJP and its supremacist ideology of Hindutva. And they did that.
And they did that. And so what is the evidence that you have that they donated to her campaign?
So within she declared for Congress in May 2011. She had her first primary. She won her primary in August 2012. By the time she won her primary, she'd received about $40,000 from people who are directly identifiable as executives, mostly executives, not even just members, of U.S. organizations which are the international affiliates of these India-based Hindutva organizations. When she won the primary, the Honolulu Star-Advertiser actually wrote an article calling it an improbable rise from a distant underdog. She was not expected to win at all. In January, February, she was still 40, 50 points behind the other guy. She was a first year in her first term, city councilor from Honolulu, running against a former mayor of Honolulu. And she was 40, 50 points behind. By the end of 2011, she'd only raised about half of what this guy had raised. And she was flagging in the polls, she was flagging in fundraising, and then these key executive members of these US Hindutva organizations who are linked to India found her and latched onto her and started pumping money into her. So that's by August 2012, when she won her first primary, about $40,000. By November 2012, when she won the general election, she'd received about $80,000 to $90,000 from individuals who are directly identifiable as executives and active members of these Hindutva organizations.
Who are some of these individuals?
Well, a couple of them, two of the first key individuals were these guys from Texas. They run a company called Star Pipe Products. One of them is Vijay Palad. He first gave to her in October 2011. The other one is his brother-in-law, Ramesh Buttada. Vijay Palad is a former governing council member of the VHP America, which is the US branch of the VHP India. Ramesh Buttada is the vice president, the national vice president of the Hindu Swayamsevak Sangh, HSS USA, which is the US branch of the RSS. And especially significantly, towards the end, after they'd given her all these tens of thousands of dollars, before she'd actually won election, Vijay Palad, Ramesh Buttada hosted a fundraiser for her in Texas. She went to Houston, Texas. She went to Vijay Palad's home, October 28, and they had a fundraiser for her. a number of these individuals were there. A number of these executives and members of these Hindutva organizations were there. 3 days later, 3 days after these Hindutva people are throwing this fundraiser for her, and after she'd raised about $20,000 in Texas in the space of a couple of weeks, she came out with her India policy, in which she basically declared that she was going to be the most pro-India congresswoman that ever existed, and that she was going to agitate for India to be unequivocally supported in its bid for a UN Security Council seat, and so on and so forth. And I support friendship with India, but friendship with India has to be just like friendship with anybody. I mean, just like my friendship with anybody that I'm a friend with, it has to be centered around, okay, is this person a murderer? Is this person a rapist? Is this person, if my friend has committed murder, then being a good friend to them requires first and foremost that I hold them accountable for things like that they might be doing, which she's not.
So has she responded to this in any capacity? Like publicly, because she put out that video about apologizing to the gay community and showing her voting record, which I give her credit for that. To me, it's the voting record that speaks the most about her change on that point of view. So has there been any public anything with regard to this?
No, she mostly has had no comments. There have been multiple articles, especially coming out in the past few weeks, that make claims that Tulsi Gabbard has received hundreds of thousands of dollars from internationalists, and claims that she has links to internationalists. I would go a couple steps further than that, say she doesn't have links, she doesn't have ties. Her congressional career exists because of financing from and free promotion from Hindu nationalist organizations in the US, which are directly linked to Hindu nationalist organizations in India, which currently control India's government and which are directly implicated in repeated pogroms and other atrocities against minorities. And so like one especially has to look at 2011, 2012, and the money that she was getting and the events that she was going to and the declaration she was making about what her policy would be towards India as she was working towards getting elected. And then after she got elected, and 1 week after she got elected, she went to Florida, actually, had a fundraiser in Florida with key members of these organizations, specifically in Florida, with key members, including the president-elect of an organization called the Overseas Friends of the BJP, which is an organization which exists in the US for the sole purpose of promoting the Indian political party, the BJP, which is the current ruling party, and which exists and operates for the sole purpose of encouraging Indian Americans to support this foreign political party. So 1 week after she gets elected, she goes to Florida. She gets a fundraiser thrown by people like this. She gets, I think, $1,000 donation at that time from the president-elect of that Overseas Friends of the BJP group, and that's November 2012. That's 2.5 years, a little under 2.5 years. No, that's a little under 2.5 years before this guy is at her wedding, this representative of Modi's BJP. And this representative of Modi, Ram Madhav, at the time when he was at her wedding, he was a national spokesperson for the BJP, the political party. Prior to that, a couple of years prior to that, he was national spokesperson for the RSS, the paramilitary organization. And while he was still national spokesperson for the RSS, before Modi came into power, before the BJP came into power, which happened in 2014, in Tulsi Gabbard's first year in office, in Tulsi Gabbard's first 6 months in office, she was in DC in July 2013, and she sits down, she has a meeting with this guy who was later at her wedding. This is July 2013, before her April 2015 wedding. She sits down, she has a meeting with this Ram Madhav while he is not an elected official, not even a political party leader, he's spokesperson of the RSS. And accompanying, also at this meeting, are the president of the BJP, which again, not an elected official, not a politician, a political party leader of the opposition party, which is trying to get into power and which is not in power at that time. And Tulsi Gabbard, 6 months in office, she's sitting here having meetings with them. Why is she having meetings with them in July 2013? To me, if you follow the money trail, June, July 2013, she had 3, maybe 4 fundraisers in 4 different states, in Illinois, California, Texas, and maybe also Florida, in that 2-month period, in which she was given about $90,000 in 2 months. In her first 6 months in office, which she doesn't need that kind of money because she's not mobilizing for her own reelection yet. She's 6 months into office. So in that 2-month period, she's given about $90K by key people in these organizations, especially in this Overseas Friends of the BJP organization. And in the middle of that, sandwiched in the middle of that, she's in DC meeting with the president of the BJP and with the national spokesperson of the RSS, which is a paramilitary organization.
Okay. That's pretty compelling, but let me ask some questions that would come from people who are who are big fans of hers. Look, I'll be real honest, and most of my viewers know this. I want her to be this progressive hero that we all were praying for, but I also got to be fair and say, I always say on this show, follow the money. But let me ask you this question. So what would you say to somebody that's like, well, of course these Hindu organizations are going to be all excited about her because she's the first ever Hindu congresswoman in the United States of America. Just like everyone was excited it was the first, Obama was the first black president.
Yeah.
So, and yeah, she's met with these leaders. People meet with that was one of the smears of, why is a congresswoman meeting with Assad? And it's like, well, she was on the Foreign Relations Committee. That was part of her job. So what would you say to somebody that's equating her meeting with these people and these representatives and taking money from them as just, it's just the Hindu community's rallying around her?
Well, for one thing, it's not the Hindu community which is rallying around her. It's not Hinduism. It's Hindu nationalism. It's not Hindus per se. It's leading members of religious nationalist organizations, political organizations, which are affiliated with, linked to the ruling party in power in India. So that's one thing. Yes, ultimately, as she's grown more popular, as she's gained fame, more mainstream people have supported her. That has happened. But if you look back at the original people supporting her back in 2011, 2012, it's not, if you look through the FEC records, it's not Hindus per se that are supporting her. It's executive leaders of these Hindu nationalist Hindutva organizations. These organizations which when they were founded and even today, they call for things like India to, their key core call is for India to be declared a Hindu nation.
And purge the non-Hindus out.
And purge the non-Hindus out. Or basically, or strip them of their citizenship rights, or treat them as second-class citizens, or things like this.
So this is more than just like Hindus being excited about the first Hindu congresswoman. This is like somebody getting money and funding from like white nationalist organizations or neo-Nazi organizations that want to clean America.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, you can have a white nationalist organization and they can call themselves like the Christian citizens of America or whatever, but that doesn't mean that they represent all Christians.
Well, let's go into that, since I think that's part of it too. And you and I had a phone conversation a couple of days ago before this interview, and you were sort of educating me, which is, I think, is the case of a lot of Americans. We don't know that much about India. I know it's a billion plus people. I know it's a largely Hindu community, But I also know, I mean, it just makes sense. I don't know the specifics, but it would have a million different sects, and other religions are there in that country because it's a massive country. It's a country whose economy has really changed and all of that. So why don't you break down for us a little bit the religious makeup of India and where Hindutva fits in there?
Okay, so off the top, Narendra Modi, his BJP party, when they came into power in 2014, they had about 31% of the popular vote. It's a parliamentary system, so they were able to get into power that way. So that's how much of the population voted for the BJP, this Hindu nationalist, Hindu supremacist party. Otherwise, at least 20% of India is non-Hindus. That includes Muslims, that includes Sikhs, that includes Christians, that includes Buddhists. Beyond that, less than 80% of India is Hindus, but out of that population of 80% Hindus, you could say that probably about 40% of them constitute people who have historically been treated as outcast or low caste, and who, while government figures might identify them as Hindu, are not necessarily people that will always self-identify as Hindu. Within all that, of the people that do identify as Hindu, there's a million different sects.
So let's clarify the caste system, because I know a little bit about the caste system, but some of our viewers might not know. So explain to our viewers basically what the caste system is, and then when you talk about that lowest caste or the undesirables, where that fits.
So the caste system is a system of social organization, of stratification of society, which breaks people up into, roughly, to simplify, 4 categories, with at the top Brahmins, and then Kshatriyas, and then Vaishyas, and then Shudras. Shudras are the low caste. At the bottom are untouchables or outcasts who are not in a caste. And the Shudras, the low castes, and the untouchables or outcasts, today, they have adopted for themselves the term Dalit, which means broken. These two communities taken together constitute the bulk of the population. The top communities, like the Brahmins, it's like 3 to 5%. The Kshatriyas and the Vaishyas, maybe total taken together 15, 20%, including like of the top 3 castes, would be about 15 to 20% of the population.
So the top caste is essentially the ruling class.
You can't exactly say that, but they have strong influence over society, and historically, yeah.
Okay, and so then in that, so of that 80% or less than 80% of the country is technically Hindu, the majority of that 80% might not even use it. Tell me that number again. That doesn't maybe even identify. Out
of that 80% that is technically Hindu, I would say that easily half of them might not necessarily self-identify as Hindu.
Kind of
out of probably I don't remember the exact numbers, but it's something like 500 or 600 million, which would be considered either low caste or outcast, Dalit or Shudra.
So kind of in the way that like America is a Christian country, and there's people like me. I was raised Catholic, which is a Christian religion. I don't consider myself Catholic. I don't consider myself Christian, but I celebrate Christmas every year. And sort of, and I
so like like a Hindu, like maybe they celebrate Diwali, maybe they celebrate Holi, but they're not a fundamentalist. Mm-hmm. Hindu nationalism is an attempt to centralize all Hindus under a single umbrella, and condense them all down into like one big uniform mass, and 2, fundamentalize them. So that for instance, a key aspect of Hindutva today would be the eating of beef. And in India today, one of the major things that BJP and these internationalist organizations have done, and that they make a political plank, is to outlaw the killing, the slaughter of cattle. Related to that, as they're doing that, many of these pro-Hindutva organizations have gone out in mobs and lynched, literally lynched, like beaten to death, set on fire, this thing, that thing, Muslims and Dalits especially, who either have eaten beef, have killed a cow, or are suspected of having eaten beef and suspected of having killed a cow. Related to that, another major issue legislatively that Hindu nationalists, Hindu supremacists in India are, where they're attempting to advance their agenda and to centralize, corner the market on their supremacy, is in passing what are called anti-conversion laws, which are in place in about 10 states right now, and which the current BJP government has repeatedly said that they want to introduce on a national level. These anti-conversion laws, they basically make it a criminal offense to change your religion unless it depends on the situation, on a specific law, but in general, unless you first go to the local magistrate, inform him you're going to change your religion and why, and get permission, and then undergo a waiting period, like of 30 days or so. And if you don't do that, you can go to prison. So again, Tulsi Gabbard, when she was in 2013 in her first 6 months in office, she's meeting with the president of the BJP, president of this political party, before that party took power. While this guy's not an elected official, this guy is one of those guys who has specifically called for passage of a national anti-conversion law. And then fast forward to December 2014, Tulsi Gabbard goes on a 3-week trip to India at Narendra Modi's specific invitation. And she goes and she meets with this guy. In that same month, she's meeting with this same guy, who at that point had become an elected official. In that same month, he is in Indian news calling for passage of a national anti-conversion law.
Wow. So
I mean, just to give you, I mean, to turn this back to Gabbard again, like just to give you a quick breakdown. In her first 2 years in office, she's done a lot more afterwards, but in her first 2 years in office, which were key years, she received donations from the president, the vice president, the former president, and the former vice president of this Overseas Friends of the BJP organization, as well as from about 6 or so national council members of the Overseas Friends of the BJP. She received donations from the president and vice president and the National Public Relations Chief and the National Public Relations Coordinator of the HSS, the international wing of the RSS, as well as about at least four HSS chapter presidents in 4 different states. She was at one VHP America event. VHP is this religious subsidiary of the RSS. She was at 3 HSS events, one of them in Australia. She attended 2 OFBJP, Overseas Friends of the BJP events. And then when she was in India, she spoke at two separate forums, or one conference and one forum, which were sponsored by the RSS or its affiliates. This is all in the first 2 years. This is not to mention like her meeting with the president of the BJP before BJP comes into power. This is not to mention her meeting with the national spokesperson of the RSS.
Is there any congressional bills that she has either co-sponsored, sponsored, or voted for that are in support of the BJP or Hindu nationalism?
Kind of the reverse, actually. So in her first year in office, at the end of 2013, there was a resolution introduced, House Resolution 417. Basically, it sought to recommend that the U.S.-India strategic dialogue be focused around human rights and religious freedom issues. It got sponsored by 52 different representatives, fully bipartisan, almost completely 50-50 split. Nothing like this had been seen in Congress in about 20 years, especially not this successful. And it also specifically called out pogroms committed by the RSS, VHP, and BJP. It called out Narendra Modi and him being implicated in the 2002 slaughter of these 2,000 Muslims. It called out a couple of other pogroms, including a 2008 pogrom against Christians, in which approximately 100 Christians were massacred, also by RSS VHP. And it highlighted that. At the end of December, so actually the timing is fascinating. At the end of December 17, I think, she gets a donation from Suhag Shukla, who is the one of the co-founders and I believe the CEO, the executive director of Hindu American Foundation, which, despite its name, is not an organization which can claim to speak for all Hindus. That's December 17. December 18, Tulsi Gabbard comes out against this House Resolution 417 and says, it weakens rather than strengthens our friendship with India. And India really is a place where historically so many different religions, Buddhists, Jews, Christians, Muslims have found protection. And so I'm against it and then worked against it. And then one day later, so 17th she gets the donation, 18th she comes out against it, 19th Hindu American Foundation publishes as a press statement her statement against this resolution. Then fast forward to April 2014, 4 or 5 months later, Tulsi Gabbard joined the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission, and that commission was holding a hearing on religious freedom in India in April 2014. She specifically came out at that hearing and read out a statement saying, I'm against this hearing because the timing is horrible, like the elections are just about to occur in India, and I feel like this is an attempt to interfere in the elections in India. Which she has no qualms about allowing these operatives of the BJP, these operatives of a foreign political party, coming and lining her campaign coffers with tens and tens and tens and tens of thousands of dollars. And then as they're doing it, meeting with these people and attending their events and meeting with representatives from India, political party and paramilitary organization representatives, not even elected officials. She has no problem with doing that in her first year in office or second year in office or before she's even elected. But then when the Human Rights Commission, the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission in April 2014 attempts to talk about human rights in India, she goes out of her way to denounce it as an attempted interference in India's political elections. So, but I mean, again, to talk about interference, that's April 2014, June 2014, April 2014, then May 2014, BJP does win. They come into power. Narendra Modi is elected as Prime Minister of India. On May 16, I believe, he was announced as Prime Minister of India. May 16, the exact same day, Tulsi Gabbard issues a press statement saying, I just got off the phone with Narendra Modi to congratulate him and his BJP for winning. And it's, among other things, very strange to me, the freshman congresswoman from Hawaii, who's just barely into her second year, her first term in office, that the same day as the Prime Minister of India is announced, the new Prime Minister of India is announced, he takes her call. Why is he taking her call? How does he even have time for that? Mm-hmm. Anyway, so she does that in May. Fast forward to June, she's in Los Angeles. And in Los Angeles, in June, she attends a Overseas Friends of the BJP banquet where she is the chief guest, where she, at this banquet, after a year or more of receiving hundreds of thousands of dollars from Hindutva organizations and lot of money from BJP affiliated organizations. At this banquet in Los Angeles, she puts on a BJP sash with the BJP colors and poses for a photograph. This is the first one she goes to. The second one she goes to is 2 months later in Georgia in August. She goes to that, and at that banquet, she's the chief guest, but she's also there with a guy named Vijay Jolly, who at the time, he's an Indian guy from India, an Indian citizen. At the time, he was the head of the Overseas Friends of the BJP. And so I just want to quickly talk about this issue of political interference. At this banquet in August, she speaks, and she congratulates the audience for their efforts to get Modi elected and the BJP elected. And she talks about how a lot of these people, and she's speaking to American citizens, Indian Americans, but American citizens. She congratulates them for all the hard work that they did by traveling to India to campaign for the BJP, which many of them did. About 1,000 Indian American U.S. citizens traveled to India to campaign. And then after she speaks, then this guy, Vijay Jolly, the head of the Overseas Friends of the BJP, gets on stage and he says, "I am a soldier of the Bharatiya Janata Party." And then he turns to Gabbard and he says that when I first heard your name, it was like a whiff of fresh air, which was evident after landing on the soil of Hawaii. I look towards you, I say, "Aloha, Tulsi Gabbard." Then he tells her, August, her re-election for second term is coming up in November. He tells her, "We are sure, with the support of the people of Indian origin, the non-resident Indians, and of course the U.S. citizens, that your victory later this year is a foregone conclusion." And keep in mind, this is a political operative from a foreign political party who is not a U.S. citizen. He's on U.S. soil at a foreign political party event, turning to a U.S. Congresswoman and telling her, "Yeah, your victory, your re-election later this year is absolutely, it's a foregone conclusion."
So how many other Hindus or citizens of India or Indian Americans have come out? Is there a lot of them publicly, or any prominent figures that are publicly against the BJP and Modi? And
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, there's a huge percentage, a huge portion. There's, out of minorities, the majority of the minorities of India here in the U.S. Are against the BJP, just out of minorities, which especially would include Sikhs and Muslims. Sikhs actually are the original Indian Americans. They first came to U.S. in 1899. They settled. They created their first Gurdwara, their first temple in 1912 in California. They are the oldest Indian American population in the country. They're mostly against BJP, especially because BJP, with their Hindu supremacist agenda, propagates this idea that Sikhs are Hindus, which is deeply offensive to Sikhs because they are a separate religion and consider themselves to be a separate religion. Muslims in U.S., of which there are many Indian Muslims, are deeply against her, or are deeply against BJP, and feel that the BJP is targeting them and wants to ethnically cleanse them. And then there's many progressive Hindus. There's many Hindus belonging to the opposition party. There's many Hindus that, from my perspective, have cut ties with trying to pick one political party or another in India anyways, and just are settled on being Americans focused on supporting American political parties. And out of those Hindus of Indian origin, many of them are, yes, against her.
Yeah.
Are against her, against Gabbard, or against the BJP, or against the RSS, or against Modi.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because Samira Khan sent me a thread of a woman who studies Indian history, and I'm trying to find the link to it, but that has done a lot of research similar to yours, it sounds like, about how This is, here it is. I'm going to bring this up real quick. Audrey Trusky.
Yes. I've met her. I met her in Delhi, actually.
Okay. And she's a South Asian history professor at Rutgers Newark and author of Culture and she did a whole thread on Twitter about Hindutva and Hinduism are two separate things and two separate categories. And she kind of does similarly what you've been doing, which is sort of giving a lot of Americans a history of India, which we don't really have. So,
and if you look at the comments on that Twitter thread, I've seen it. It's typical of many of her Twitter threads. The pure hatred and vitriol and threats of violence that are thrown at her is just absolutely atrocious. It's insane.
By Hindutva people?
By Hindutva people who are very, very active on social media. That's actually one of the things they take pride in is their social media adeptness.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow. So have you taken in attacks and stuff like this?
Here and there, yes. Yeah, there have been a couple of articles that have been written about me. Yeah.
And so you have I've
been called a rabble. Actually, specifically, I've been called a rabble rouser. A rabble rouser, specifically been called.
It's nice to be in.
And that was because I was protesting against a event called the World Hindu Congress in Chicago last September, because the head of the RSS, a guy named Mohan Bhagwat, his title is Sarsang Chalak, which basically means supreme leader. Mm-hmm. And he has repeatedly called for, in so many words, for establishment of India as a Hindu nation. He was the keynote speaker at this event in Chicago. So I was there. There were probably 200 to 300 other people there protesting. Mm-hmm. I spoke out against it, as I said then, and I'll say now. I protested because it was not a benign religious event. It was a political event. Tulsi Gabbard was actually intended to be one of the main speakers at that event. And because of months and months of pressure, especially in her primary election this past year, she ultimately backed out of it and ended up issuing a letter in which she agreed and said that it was a partisan Indian political event. It was organized though by organizations which are led by her key donors. It was organized by the VHP America and the HSS USA, and all of the people there. Out of the people there, I'd have to look at the exact count, but I'm sure that there were probably well over 100 people there that have donated to her who are. I've personally identified at least 90 different individuals within her first two election cycles, for 2011 through 2012 and 2013 to 2014, who are identifiable as members and especially as executives of these different organizations in the U.S. They've donated money to her. Yeah.
Well, I
mean, and that's just leading up to 2014.
Sure. Well, Peter, I really appreciate you giving us this in-depth history of these donations and these people and what these actual organizations are, because I feel like, one of the reasons I've done this show is I just want to get to the truth, and I'm not going to jump on the ridiculous smears against her because she's, she wants to federalize marijuana on legalize marijuana on a federal level. She wants Medicare for all.
Well, why stop at marijuana? Legalize all drugs.
Yeah.
End the drug war.
Yeah.
If she can, I would love to hear her say that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. She's been vocal about against these regime change wars. She's a vet that saw her friends die in a ridiculous regime change war.
Exactly. I've seen my friends come back from the war in Iraq, from the U.S. Marine Corps. I've seen them come back and deal with PTSD for years. I desperately want a presidential candidate to stand up and do what is so unpopular in America today and speak out against this insane foreign policy, this decades of insane foreign policy, which have led to the creation of the American empire and led to the destabilization of huge portions of the world, especially in the Middle East, and led to the deaths of I don't know how many millions of people. So when she talks about things like war and peace, and she talks against regime change, I like to hear that. But I cannot accept her as anything but a hypocrite if she's talking about that on one hand, while she's whitewashing and lining her campaign coffers with money from these Hindu nationalists who are implicated in staging pogroms, many people call them genocides, of minorities, of the most vulnerable people in India. And the minorities in India today are truly suffering.
Well,
and so I would say, like, I mean, if I had nothing else to say, Graham, I would say that no, Tulsi Gabbard should not be president. I do want a president that speaks especially against the American empire and against the disastrous self-destructive foreign policy which the U.S. government has adopted for decades. I do want that. But no, Tulsi Gabbard is not that person. And she shouldn't be president, but she should not even be in Congress. In fact, I think that she should be, if not investigated on a criminal level, at least deeply investigated on a journalistic level.
Yeah, and she needs to answer these questions. I mean, you bring up a valid point. You know, you can't. And I agree. I want a progressive president that's like, if I'm against ridiculous regime change wars, I can't. It's the same thing of like when people are like, go, oh, Russia hacked our election, and look what the CIA and the United States government has done in the Middle East, and Central and South America. It's unreal.
Exactly.
So we can't.
I mean, to jump off of that point, I agree with, okay, when you're talking about, well, Russia hacked our election. Well, okay, fine. But what about all the times when the U.S. has gone in and actually like toppled democratically elected leaders? That's a bit of a different story. Okay, but if we're going to talk about Russia hacking our election, and we're going to talk about foreign political interference in the American political scene, how about we look at Tulsi Gabbard and while we're all distracted with the Russian political interference, maybe we should turn our focus and pay a little bit of attention to the Indian political interference.
It's legitimate. You bring up legitimate points, and it's points that probably a lot of Americans are not made aware of because we don't, the corporate media and our schools and everything just kind of cover parts of the world in these giant swaths. Like, well, India's all Hindu, and that's it. There we go. That's and obviously it would be like saying, if you were lived in another country in another part of the world and your only view of America was the Southern Baptists or the evangelicals or people.
Yeah, exactly.
So, well, Peter, I really think I appreciate your time, and to our viewers, I'm not trying to go after Tulsi Gabbard. I'm just trying to go after the facts, and that's what I'm going to do on this show. And there's a lot about her that I like and support. There's a lot of attacks on her that I think are ridiculous from the corporate war machine. But the facts that you bring up here have really opened my eyes to it. And to the viewers out there, make your own decisions, do your own research. We have, as I've said, we've got 8 to 18 months before the primaries start. And, I can't, I'm against war, and I'm against supporting any type of nationalism and genocide, and I'm for a Green New Deal. And so if a candidate doesn't have those things, I don't know that I can vote for him. So I to our viewers out there, thank you so much. And Peter, you have a big article that's coming out that's going to outline all of this that you said is getting peer reviewed and everything.
Yeah, I have. It is absolutely provable that her congressional career exists because of support from these people, and that it's been a quid pro quo, pay-to-play relationship back and forth for years, and that I don't think that it's necessarily even just that they give her money and so she supports their agenda. I think that she may actually even be in support of internationalism.
All right. Well, thank you so much. And I will put a link to your website in the show notes so people can do even more research on your work, and folks make your own conclusions. That's what the political vigilante is all about, man. I just want to get to the truth. I'm for policy over party. I'm for the right thing. I'm not going to blindly follow anybody. I've said that before on this show. I felt like maybe I cut Obama way too much slack because he was my guy, and I'm not doing that anymore. And as much as I want Tulsi Gabbard, I'm a surfer. I want this. I want her to be the one, but this is probably not going to do it. I mean, this will probably make me not want to support her. And so thank you, Peter, for your time. And thank you, everybody out there, for watching. Like, share. And in your comment section, tell me what you guys think. I want to hear your thoughts and views on this, because a lot of this is new information to me. And it's pretty severe, in my opinion. So thank you so much, Peter. And thank you, everybody, for watching.